We'll call up Neerath Bhatnagar, a partner at Dalberg and well known by many of you, to moderate the panel. Neerath, over to you.
Thanks, Abhay. Great to be here. Very excited to and very privileged to be moderating this panel on technologies. Without any more detail, let me just invite my panelists on the stage, maybe starting with Brian. And I'll make very quick introductions as you walk up to the stage. So Brian, as many of you, all of you probably know, leads the WASH work at the Gates Foundation. Very excited to have you, Brian, here. Next, can I invite Roshan, who is a senior program officer, leads a lot of urban sanitation markets work at the foundation. Roshan, great to have you here. Bhavna from EY. And as all of you know, Bhavna has been really steering a lot of work with different state governments, trying to usher in technologies, so very keen on having her insights. Ankur from, who's the CEO and of Ankur Technologies, and very keen on getting your perspective on innovation in the space. Please take a seat. Anywhere is fine. And last but not least, Sampath from Tide, Sampath is the CEO of Tide Technologies, and over the last few years has been working on innovation within the space. The way we'll run this is, and Abhay, tell me if this is still the plan. We have an hour for the panel, and then we're going to split this into two segments. We'll begin with a 45-minute panel discussion, and we'll cover a bunch of themes that I'll just share with all of you. And then we generally do want to make this interactive. There are many, many questions when it comes to sanitation technology. So the last 15 minutes will really be Q&A, and any questions, hard or easy, that you want to pose, we'll be taking that. Let me begin with just sort of sharing a bit of context on why this panel was put together, and also why we think it's an important problem to sort of discuss. And there are three things we are hoping will come out of this discussion. Those three things really are why. The why of innovation in sanitation at this stage. Why do we need innovation to begin with? Where are we on that roadmap of progress, right? What are the range of technologies, the different stages they are in, the successes or the failures that we now know have happened in the last few years, and the how and what of the way forward. So given where we are, what needs to happen to improve sanitation outcomes in India and in Asia and Africa? So, and I'm going to start this with a quote that many of you might have heard, and maybe if anyone wants to venture a guess on who this quote is ascribed to, the quote goes like this: "Everything that can be invented has been invented." Anyone wants to guess who said this? Anyone? Everything that can be invented has been invented. Steve Jobs, okay. Okay, so the answer is, there was this, sorry? Okay, Thomas Alva Edison. You're getting close in terms of timeline, but not him. So this is actually Charles Duell, who used to be the US patent attorney in 1899. And this is a very, very famous quote ascribed to him. And the reason I think it's important to begin with that is because often when we think of innovation, it is not very obvious why we need innovation in a certain space, right? The human mind and human behavior is such that we get used to our reality and we can't imagine. So it's often a failure of imagination which prevents us from trying out new things and improving how things work. So that, I think, is how sanitation has been perceived, right? If you look at the last 150 years or so, there are certain pieces of sanitation that have stayed pretty much where they were in the 1800s and 1900s. If you think of any major infrastructural problem, it probably has 4 different components, right? So there's, in a country at a national level, there's obviously the policy framework, there's demand and behavior, there's the technology and the hardware, and there's financing. So even if one were to look at the trajectory of India, I would say the policy, the financing, the behavior and the demand have moved quite significantly forward. But by and large, there weren't too many improvements in technology, and which is why these efforts that have been made across the sanitation value chain to really drive deep innovation, which solves for certain problems, is really important. And the other thing to remember, and I'll just open this up in a second, is that there is this tendency when we come to think about sanitation, when we talk about sanitation, of thinking in an all or nothing frame, right? So when you engage with state governments or city governments, there is an all or nothing mentality when it comes to waste treatment. So they want the gold standard, they want the Rolls Royce of a sewer network which solves for all waste streams and so on and so forth, which is connected to households. Whereas the reality is that actually keeps cities and states in suboptimal equilibrium, right? So there are multiple waste streams that can be solved for at a fraction of the cost. There are a range of models that can be tried out, but this whole all or nothing mentality is actually a big impediment in making real progress, and you have multiple thousands and millions of Dalis being lost because of that. So again, coming back to the panelists, I think there are three things that I'd really like to cover here. Number one, why is innovation in this space important? How is innovation being framed in this space? Where are we with different kinds of technologies? What has your experience been? And then, most importantly, perhaps moving forward, what needs to happen in terms of the way procurement happens in the government systems, the public sector, the private sector? How do we make this sustainable, right? So I'll start with you, Brian, and maybe what would be great to get from you in maybe the next 5 or 6 minutes is just some historical perspective on how the Gates Foundation started thinking about technology innovation for sanitation across the entire sort of spectrum, the front end, the back end, and then what has the journey been in the last 4 or 5 years? What are the products that are now there? What stages are they in? And what has the experience been of deploying some of these things?
Thank you. So it's interesting when we think back about why did Bill and Melinda, for example, decide that they wanted to invest in WASH. It comes from primarily from a position of improving health. And so, everybody in this room is familiar with how poor sanitation leads to poor health and all of the different indicators of that poor health. And so, and looking at clean drinking water and the challenges of sanitation, the idea was since fecal contamination is such a huge driver of poor drinking water quality, maybe there was an opportunity to really focus a little bit upstream and focus on sanitation. But the focus was really on, can you keep people from coming into contact with the pathogens that are in our waste that make them sick? And so so I say that because it's actually one of the guiding principles is that let's look at sanitation not just from a reducing BOD and COD, which is typically the way people have in the sanitation community have thought, but how can we remove all the pathogens that make people sick? I mean, it was interesting to me. I don't come from a long sanitation background, but to realize that most wastewater treatment plants do not basically test the effluent for pathogens. They test the effluent for BOD, CAD, total solids, and so that's not been the perspective even in the sanitation community overall. But it also we set aspirational goals, and even when it came to pathogen kill, we thought aspirationally. So for example, there's some pathogens that are really, really hardy. And some people don't know how big an issue they are. So for instance, in North America, people are very, happy to talk, often happy with using composting toilets. And so many people ask me, why don't you guys just scale up composting toilets around the world? And what they're not aware of is that there's over 1.5 billion people today around the world that are suffering from soil-transmitted helminths or intestinal worms. So that might be Ascaris, otherwise known as roundworm or hookworm or whipworm. It's a huge global problem, and it's a problem where we address it by giving kids drugs, and then the worms go away, and then the worms come right back because their entire environment is infected with soil-transmitted helminths. And so back 7, 8 years ago, when the team before I was there was thinking about what would it mean to really try to remove pathogens from the waste stream, they said, we should set a bar. These are very hardy pathogens. Soil-transmitted helminth eggs can live in a pit latrine, in a composting pile for years. But could we come up with approaches that would kill all pathogens, whether that was in the toilet, so right on site, what became our Reinvented toilet program, or in a waste treatment situation, what became our omniprocessor program. So that idea of killing all pathogens was kind of central to us imagining what might be possible. And then another thing that was quite central is if the team early on looked at wastewater treatment plants and can we just sewer the world? And came to the conclusion that that was just not viable, that it was too expensive and there were too many challenges to have everybody in every developing country around the world get a sewer line, flush toilet, going to a wastewater treatment plant. Many, many reasons for that that I don't need to go into with this audience. But then looking at how does the non-sewered sanitation world work, because it's there. There are pits and tanks everywhere. There were 8 years ago when the team started. There are transport mechanisms, typically informal in most places. And then there are traditional fecal sludge approaches to fecal sludge treatment. But what's interesting is all of them are bespoke. So every tank, for the most part in most places, the tanks and the pits are designed by an individual, built by a mason, and the fecal sludge treatment plants also are designed kind of in a one-off basis. And there are many, many different ways in which things can go wrong, in which quality can lag, whether it's in the design, the build, or the ongoing operations and maintenance of your pit or tank at a household level, or of your fecal sludge treatment plant at a community level. And so one of the things that I found myself thinking on the earlier panel was something that our team started with, which is wanting to come up with solutions that can truly reach scale. And if you think about the idea of scaling up solutions and really being confident that every pit latrine and every tank that has been installed or that will be installed are all done perfectly so that they don't seep, so that there's no pathogen leak into the environment. That's remarkably challenging. But if you look at how do we drive actually quality at scale in other parts of the world, other parts of the economy, is through manufactured solutions. And so early on, the why was, can you come up with manufactured solutions for toilets that treat all the waste? And that's what wound up being our Reinvented Toilet program, or manufactured solutions for fecal sludge treatment plants, where you are investing serious technological expertise, but then also manufacturing capabilities, so that you could be building things that could be units of scale and units of manufacturing that solve, maybe not all, but many of the problems that an FSTP faces. So those are kind of two of the foundational concepts, I guess, that led into us deciding to invest in what we called our Transformative Technologies Initiative. Last year, we renamed that the Transformative Technologies and Commercialization Initiative. And the reason is because we actually have made tremendous progress, and it's no longer kind of the scientific questions or even the engineering questions of, is it possible to build a reinvented toilet or an Omni processor? Right now, we're actually starting to face what are the challenges of actually bringing these to market as manufactured products and then scaling up the commercialization. I wasn't there at the birth of this program. I joined in 2013, so I get no credit for the vision that led to it. But what I understand is when the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge was first announced, most people in the community thought it was kind of a crazy idea. Like it was unlikely to ever work. Nobody knew if you could come up with a very low energy way to kill all the pathogens in our waste, let alone be able to kind of put it in a toilet-sized new household appliance and not have it require a lot of extra energy or cost a ton of money. And what's remarkable is over the past many years, so we were here in 2014 in Delhi, and we showed the latest prototypes. Put up your hand if you had a chance to be at our Reinvent the Toilet fair in 2014. So a handful of folks. Even there, what it felt like was a really, really well-funded science project fair, right? It was like a science fair. But the progress was very visible in a few short years. And I remember coming away from that thinking, you know, I can't look at any one of those designs, of any one of those reinvented toilet designs or even Omni processor design, and be certain that it's going to work yet. There were still a lot of technological risks in those designs. But I started thinking it'd be very hard to imagine that they're all going to fail, that none of them will get across the finish line and show that they can kill all the pathogens and be a viable product that would have a real market. What's interesting is since then, many different reinvented toilet designs have gone into the field for testing. We have now, I believe, 7 different designs that are in field testing for reinvented toilets. And we think of those both at household level reinvented toilets and multi-stall or multi-unit reinvented toilets that might be more appropriate for a community toilet or a public toilet, a school toilet or an apartment. And we also have 2 different omniprocessor designs that are also in field trial that are represented by panelists here on the panel with me. So like amazing progress has been made, but we recognize that we still have this chasm to cross of commercialization. So the last thing I want to talk about is this, what we think is actually a really important milestone for this transformative technologies and commercialization initiative, which is the Reinvented Toilet Expo that we will be hosting in Beijing November 6th, 7th, and 8th of this year. So that's about 5 weeks from now. It's a relatively small, kind of invitation-only event, about 400 people that we think are going to be the key stakeholders in helping us commercialize these technologies, or frankly, helping our partners commercialize these technologies, and help go from what might be a typical ramp of a new product that's slow and steady over time. What could it mean to ramp these products much, much more quickly? So to accelerate the adoption, the deployment, and the scale-up of these technologies. So it's going to be a very exciting time for us. And I encourage you all to be paying attention to your PR, your news feeds, and our Twitter accounts, because we're excited. We know that there will be companies that will be announcing that they absolutely are going to be in the business of selling omniprocessors. Other companies announcing that they're going to be in the business of selling reinvented toilets that actually kill all pathogens. So these crazy aspirational targets we'd had in the past, we actually finally have some products that are going to be coming to market very shortly. On the reinvented toilet side, the first ones that come to market will be multi-unit, where you can amortize the cost of one treatment component for many different toilets. But we see also tremendous progress on the household toilet as well. So hopeful for some announcements on that side as well. And what's interesting is we will also be bringing our partners from development banks, other funders, and stakeholders and decision makers from governments to try to see the progress that's being made and to basically ask them to themselves be champions that are committed to helping us do everything we can to accelerate the adoption of these technologies and help them find a place quickly in the marketplace. We know that once you get products in the marketplace, a lot of things start to take on their own momentum. You get feedback from users that tell you whether or not you've got a great product. You understand what the challenges of operating and maintaining these are over time are really going to look like. And that none of that learning really starts at scale until you have products being sold. So I'm very much looking forward to the Reinvented Toilet Expo in about now 5 weeks. Much of my team is kind of going crazy, doing everything they can to make that a success, and working with the many, many partners that are both our technology partners and the commercial partners that are going to be bringing these technologies to market. So it'll be a very exciting time for us. I think of it as the time that we go from science project mode to, wow, these products are inevitable. They're absolutely going to change our world over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And it's really just a question of how fast does that transition and transformation take off. We will have pit latrines, have septic tanks for decades and decades. We will have wastewater treatment plants forever. So these are going to take over every scenario. But I think it will provide some new opportunities to service the needs, including of folks who are the hardest to reach with great sustainable sanitation services. So we're very excited about that and happy to take questions later on.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for sharing that journey. Super exciting, and it's wonderful to see how in sanitation, this is the trajectory that seems to be taking place. And it's quite, I mean, there's a bunch of work that we do in places like energy or clean water, etc. And it's quite similar. The world of the future is going to look very different. So let's say in a country like India, 60% of the people who will get energy access between now and 2030 will not get energy access through traditional systems or grid power. It all be decentralized. I think this whole scenario of how does the incremental person get access to sanitation or clean water, we will see deep innovation and a bunch of innovators who will approach these domains from non-traditional sort of sources, right? So even in sanitation, and we actually have a couple of innovators on the panel. So I will turn to Ankur now. Ankur, you sort of have been working with the Janki omniprocessor, your own sort of variation on that. omniprocessor, it's a fairly large-scale system. You are close to sort of deployment in Vadodara. What would be great to get from you is just how your journey started. How did you first spot this opportunity? What has worked? What has not worked? What are open questions for you? And how do you see the path forward?
Hi. Yeah. So, like Neeraj said, I'm Ankur. I run a company called Ankur Scientific based out of Baroda, Gujarat. We're about 31 years old now. We've been basically in the biomass business. Now, the biomass business that we do is basically gasification, so more decentralized, more distributed. And one of the challenges we've faced there since the time we've been in the business has been collecting biomass itself. So about 4 years ago, we got a mail from the foundation, from RTI, which was working with the foundation, and they started talking to us about, would you be interested in helping us commercialize a sanitation technology that we are developing, which would mandate collection of liquid waste? And my people came to me with the email, and I'm like, guys, we can't collect solid waste. Are we talking about collecting liquid waste now? But I said, okay, this is the Gates Foundation, massive name, continue to speak to them. So we continued to speak to them for a while, and about a year down the road, Brian came down to meet us with his team. And he made a presentation which blew my mind away, because it blew everybody's mind away in my company, because we had no idea about the scale of this problem. We come to Delhi so often, you see the Yamuna, which is a dying river here, and finally, as supposedly educated people, you go out and say, oh, there's some industrial effluent coming in from somewhere that's killing the river, et cetera, et cetera. And the presentation told me that that's not true anymore. It is our waste, which even if it goes to STPs, doesn't really get treated, and STPs don't work most of the time because they are OPEX negative, right? And here was a technology which was coming out, which would basically allow you to handle unsewered areas, and at the same time, also look at STPs where you could make a more positive impact, right? So from that perspective, we said this makes a lot of sense. It's a technology we should be part of, because the challenge is huge, and so the opportunity is huge. And at the same time, we seem to have some of the engineering strengths that we thought we could apply to this technology area. So over the past 3 years, we have now been working with the foundation. We have indigenized this technology. So the Omni processor developed in the US is now designed for India by us. And we're hopefully rolling out the first setup in Vadodara in March 2019, right? So hugely excited. Now, even when the foundation funded the first project, right, and this first project was going to be a complete grant to a corporation, my real worry, which is what I kept telling Brian and John and Madhu and all, was that we may put out the first, how do you make this a business case? How will this ever work out long term? So on their side, they were working with various aid agencies to ensure that, like you have STP funds available, there would be funds available for something like this. But increasingly, as we are getting into this business, we are realizing that the sludge problem itself is so massive that itself makes it such a compelling business case that I think the OP is, like Brian says, the need of the hour, and it will basically, once we have the first few demos installed, will become massive, right?
Can I just add one thing that's kind of remarkable about this technology? Ankur mentioned wastewater treatment plants are OPEX negative. These plants have the potential to be OPEX positive because they generate things that have commercial value. So either electricity or distilled water. So that we think is quite remarkable. And then the other thing that just to think about is that wastewater treatment plants take a tremendous amount of water, drinking quality water, and a lot of electricity, and to get rid of waste. And this is a technology that, in effect, is generating electricity and high quality water. So it's kind of a remarkable flip.
Yeah. Ankur, just to sort of double click on a question. So in the last 3 years or so, given the scale of your technology, it's not a small solution. It's a reasonably large solution. The scale of your technology. Right. What has when you talk with the government, the local government, in their minds, do they frame this as a substitute or a complement to traditional systems? What has the experience been?
So I think at this point of time, it's more seen as a complement, not really a substitute, right? And the substitution will, it's not, you really can't call it a substitution because it would go into locations where you don't have sewers. So you would not typically then have an STP, right? So you need a standalone system anyway, so it makes sense, but one of the issues which obviously the foundation is working on extensively is how do you ensure collection is done as it needs to be done? And so once you do that, a technology that like this could be rolled out. But having said that, I think from our perspective as a company, because we are a for-profit, what we are trying to do is saying that while we are building a large OP, which is a 600 KLD right now, and we are recovering about 90% water, and we are generating electricity, we want to scale this smaller and bigger. So you don't want to be stuck to this one size. So you will want to scale it to 1/10, 1/20 the size also. So then you can handle various sizes of communities.
Sure. So with that, I think let me go over to Sampath now, because OP on the one hand is like the large solution in this space, and then Tide has been sort of deploying, has already deployed 3 smaller sort of OPs in 3 different cities. So Sampath, very curious, these are in the field right now. Number one, what was the pitch? Why did the city sort of get into it? How has the experience been? In your context, is this the only sort of solution, or is this also a complement to traditional systems?
Well, we were basically in a testing wing for the project on OP development at the small scale. That's how we got into it. We were not really trying to do an FSTP to start with. But then Swachh Bharat happened. Then Modi came in. I think then the focus of the foundation got into India, and we were fortunately in India at that point of time. So I think that's what made the difference. And that's how we got into this 4 years back. In terms of the product which we are doing, which is, I think of a different end of the spectrum than what Ankur is talking of. Ankur talks of 600 KL. We are talking of a maximum of 25 to 30 KL. So we are at towns of population of less than 50,000 generally. That's the kind of size at which we are. And in terms of for towns of 50,000 population, the situation is that, there are no existing sewers. And the potential for setting up sewers is not there possibly in the next 15, 20 years at the least. So this is going to be actually not a substitute, but this is the solution. And that's where the difference also is, I think, in what Ankur is doing and what we are doing, because Ankur possibly looks at more at the solid part of it, but we have to give a holistic solution for both the liquid and the solid. Now that's the difference. So we are actually an FSTP, not just an OP. Theirs is truly an OP. The Omni processor, as per the Gates definition, which says that, something which handles the solids primarily. So that means we get material which is starting from sub 1% solids to maybe we have at the best got up to about 10% solids. I think in Warangal we had got up to about 10% plus solids. So we are basically talking of this kind of a range in terms of technology. The other thing, since we have run these systems for almost about 6-7 months now, different periods, different locations, different periods. And I think the last number which we are looking at, not a very big number, but we have done, I think, about 1.5 ml of liquid being treated over the last period which we have run these 3 plants. The understanding is that the effluent which is coming in at different locations is not the same. So although septic tank waste is this, it looks septic tank waste, when we are sitting on the other side in the FSTP, we realize that the kind of material which ends up coming varies quite significantly by location. So the kind of waste which I get in Narsapur is different from what I'm getting in Warangal, and fairly different from what I'm getting it in Y. So that's one very interesting experience which we have got. And anybody handling FSTP, the CDD team and all would know this particular story. That's a significant thing. The other thing which I think because of the way we have looked at this problem, we have looked at solid separation as a first step in our process, which is not typically the way things have been looked at in the past. So we have looked at solid separation as the first step in our problem, and then we are trying to handle the solid and the liquid separately. So that's one particular thing. There's a lot of liquid handling capability and technology available. We have to be very clear. India has got excellent people and one of the best brains around that. It's, I think, the solid handling which is, I think, the new innovation which possibly needs to come into the septic tank handling systems, basically. And that's where we are. And since we are now, not only are we running these 3 plants, we are also bidding for and looking at the tenders which are coming at this point, because in the last 6 months, thanks to Andhra and Telangana, there's a host of tenders which have come in, and apart from Andhra and Telangana, I think we have looked at almost about a dozen other tenders which have been called.
From your vantage point, working with the government in multiple states, how do you see the risks that are somewhat settled right now, for which we have a good answer with this portfolio of the OP and the RT technology, I mean, which are things that are getting settled, and which are the questions that still need to be settled before this can go forward.
Thank you. Primarily what I've heard, the co-panelists talking from a scale point of view, from the technology options, the input configuration is very different. I think particularly from a government point of view, there is a very high level of appreciation of looking at fecal sludge in entirety, at least in the government that I work directly with, which are the implementing partners. They're not only looking at the treatment technology, their vision is rather holistic. They want to know where there are access problems. Is there a solution pertaining to that? It's a consistent request that has been coming to us that, do we have a technology option or set of solutions that we can propose on the areas where there is an access problem, typically the urban slums. I think because of the momentum that we've gained on various technology options on treatment side of fecal sludge, there is a high level of understanding that these are the options of DVATs. CDD is the leading provider. Then we have other upcoming solutions, the pilots which are happening. But I think that what they're currently looking at is two areas where I feel there is an innovation gap from a treatment point of view. One is the areas where there is an access challenge. Second is when we look at septic tank cleaning or single pit, where there is a problem of, again, access. The whole social issues related to sanitation workers. Are there any solutions? And one of the conversations we were having with the government, they were very keen on one, innovation that has happened in Kerala, Bandicoot. What can we do to bring them to help us to find a solution? But because, as Sampath mentioned, that technology in some of the areas in the nascent stage is going to take time to go through that journey of technology being available. We have the verified results. How do you build that confidence of the government? And then, you provide these sort of gaps right now to address with technology as an option. But if you look at it from government's point of view, are they open? Yes. Are they looking proactively for solution? Yes. Are they open to new ideas, doing pilot, inviting people to come and talk about it? Yes. Some of the challenges that I do see, is going to be also a detriment to the scale at which we're going. Primarily going to be related to land access. While we're looking at, a flow of activities, the tenders are happening, we need to follow it with ensuring that you do have land availability as a, condition precedent. Second is related to the quality of the work that is happening. Honestly speaking, from government point of view, they're looking at numbers with very little capability to monitor the quality aspect. So while we're doing, we may operationalize some of the things and we will monitor the quality as it goes, but could there be, better ways to manage it from the word go? I think that's where we need to be mindful of. As far as technology options are concerned, that while from a treatment or FSTP, purely if I talk about what are the various options, we've seen in case of Odisha, and I heard that Tamil Nadu is thinking the same way, that they've identified the approaches to treatment, and they're identifying that these are the output indicators we want to meet with these technologies. Freezing that, I think there is a fair degree of flexibility that's there in terms of choosing the technology, which makes it easier for technology providers, innovators, as long as they fulfill the criteria, they have whatever technical or financial conditions attached, you could look at that. But going beyond that, what are the other opportunities? And just to quote on the scale and what Sampath mentioned, we're at the beginning. So as part of the finance task force, we've done a broad level assessment that to fulfill the current need, including the co-treatment and the proposed STPs, what is the market potential? So, we're hoping that in next 10 years or so, to fulfill the whole market, we would need more than 4,000 FSTPs in the country. And currently, what we've heard in AP, Telangana, what Tamil Nadu has already proposed, what Odisha would be looking at, we're looking at broadly 200. So from 200, we need to reach to 4,000, if that remains the path. So how prepared are we on the innovation journey? These are, I think, some of the challenges. If I am looking at it from government point of view, we need to be very, very mindful. And how are we going to enable the government to have these options, solutions, and bring in those verifiable results that this makes sense. This is why, how, and why you should do it. As far as their openness is concerned, I think it's very high. They're very keen, and they are looking for solutions.
Sure. Thanks, Bhavna. I think that's fantastic in terms of just the opportunity. So if there are 4,000 FSTPs, and India has some 5,000 something cities and towns, the way we classify them, I want to actually double click on the market. What will it take to really crack the market, and maybe turn to Roshan for that question, right? In your role, obviously there's a huge heterogeneity in the type of cities and the types of urban environments that exist. Now, keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind that technology in itself, or technology solution in itself, is not sufficient to get something sustainably. You need business models, you need a lot of, let's say, buy-in. How are you thinking about different kinds of solutions that are more market ready? So on the, I would say, technology spectrum, there's stuff for which has just been prototyped. There's a lot of evidence that still needs to come in, and then there's stuff that's closer to being deployment ready or is already being deployed. So talking about those kinds of things, right, that are more market ready, and keeping in mind the heterogeneity that exists in the, let's say, the Indian market, right? You have very large cities wherein these technologies will solve for a pocket in that city, and there are cities, small cities, for which this might be the only solution, right? Now, what do you think needs to happen to develop the market and to make sure the right matchmaking happens?
Yeah, thank you. I just back from Japan 2 days. Last week I was in Japan. Then a lot of discussion happened, the same issue. And then interestingly, the Japanese people, 40 years back also, they were totally non-sugar. Not totally, and most majority of parts of non-sugar. So they need to have immediate solution. That is, what technology they need to bring it out. And then they come up with the idea of Jokaso. And the Jokaso is technology. But the way how they market that Jokaso is, they come up with so many intervention for policy that mainly on the act, the Jokaso Act. They come on Jokaso Act. So in the Jokaso Act, they prepare such a way that they're the way how all household, how they need to get access to that toilet, that treatment unit, and what sort of service provision need to be there, and how the service provider need to provide services. All those were included, and it was endorsed by the government. And because of that strong enforcement of that in their act, then the demand of the Jokaso is getting very high. And slowly, then when they industrialize, the city grows, then they start to build more sewer system, and the Jokaso replaced by the sewer. But still, there are 15 to 20% area still they rely with the Jokaso. I was there in two places this time, and then I saw 40 years old Jokaso I saw is still up in operation perfectly, and it's also like septic tank, improved septic tank. The water, it looks like this. So that is because it's all because of service. And then what they told me that it's not technology, the way how they create critical mass of the service provider, and the way how they function like the very professional way, how they function, that is the key that the things are happening. So also India, we also need to think those best practices, we need to really take it up, not only talking about the technology. Of course, technology is needed, but the existing things, how we need to improve, like how we improve the containment system itself is one of the best way to go. Because without containment system, you can't really get a sludge. And at the same time, now if we are now somebody coming up, Tide coming up with very innovative technology, and Ankur is coming up with that technology, it still makes some time. This is the right time to discuss with government to own that product as a government product. And then also put all those act, everything to develop. And other critical issue, what we are not really talking about the business. Brian also talking about the pathogen killing is major component what we want to see. Similarly, without business, we can't really market the product. And we never think about, still we are talking about sludge, but actually we are not still talking about the safe disposal of sludge and reuse of sludge, because you just think about like whatever technology we are now implemented here, like the either lay models, Devanali model, or whatever model we are talking about, still the sludge disposal is not really, we are thinking about how that is safely disposed, whether this is really safely disposed or not. And even if you talk about co-treatment side, also the sludge coming out from the co-treatment as well. Even what do you do with the sludge that is disposed in the treatment plant? And all co-treatment, when you do that decanting station, when you establish, again it goes there and the sludge is still coming out. And we haven't really talked about how you really safely dispose that sludge, because you need to remove the pathogen. That's the main goal. And that is still, we have to work on that. And business part, we have not really worked on. IMI is here, so they have nicely come up with a very nice business model. So how we test that business model in our city, that is also really very interesting. I just saw a book over there. He has that quite big book he come up with. And all kind of the reuse of the sludge is mentioned there, whether we can do or not. First, we have to see where the sludge is going to be as a business component, whether it is going to be fertilizer, is it going to be gas, all those things need to consider first, and then we need to think about the technology. That's not really we are doing. I think that there is a big scope because demand is coming up. And the good thing is our colleague, Wasai, also he's an innovative guy. He also come up with that product, like the mobile dewatering device. We need to really work on that. If that is really coming up, so mobile dewatering system, how it can be coupled with this tide. So you just need to match that. And then you don't need to have land thing, what you're talking about. You don't need a land. So all those things, innovative things we need to produce together with coupling all those things, I think it's possible.
So let me try and summarize. I think you raised a very, very important point. I'll summarize that and also transform that into a question for the panel, right? And then we'll open it up to the audience. I think what Roshan is saying is that, right, a big inflection point for such technologies is when a system, a whole country, for instance, which maybe has 100 points of procurement, different states, different cities, they take procurement calls differently. If there is some meaningful, rational decision-making framework, selection framework, that allows allows procurement to optimize for things like sludge, pathogen-free sort of waste management. So we're still not there where such sort of decision-making is very clear and sort of there is a lot of heterogeneity in that. So what can we do to move such decision-making, such choosing to standards that make sure human health is sort of adequately cared for, which make sure, let's say, if certain types of business models actually have value through energy recovery, all of those things are valued. So what is it that needs to happen upstream in changing the, I would say, decision-making tree, if you will? And this is an open question. Whoever wants to respond.
I take a slightly contrarian view on this. See, the expectation, this room is full of knowledgeable people. You walk out of this room, you are not necessarily going to meet as knowledgeable people. Let's also be very clear. The expectations at the other end may not be as stringent as we are trying to put it at this point of time. So I think there are two ways as I see it. One is that you have to have one technology delivery and proof which says that you can do so good. I think that's very clear. People have to have a references which says, yes, these are good examples to follow. Might be more expensive, may not be viable today, but they are good reference plans. So this is one part. And the second part is that there has to be possibly, the success of this whole program, whatever has happened in the last 1.5 years, suddenly CS 200. That means we are moving from 10 today, madam. 10 to 200 in the next 1 year. So basically we are 20 scale, if it's a 5 times multiplication, 5x I can understand, but it's a 20x multiplication we are going to be doing in a period of 1 year or 1.5 years. So we are going to be seeing good and the bad and the ugly. Let's be very clear. In the next 1 year we are going to see all the three of them. And I think if we have good review and learning mechanisms from this, I think that's one very critical requirement, that there has to be learning mechanism and everybody knows what's happening. Data is available, plans are seen, understood what's working, what's not working. If we can do really this too, I think then the understanding happens saying that what works and what doesn't work. And then I think maybe what Roshan is asking for, that there is going to be a higher acceptance for and paying higher. Automatically what's going to happen at some point of time is that there's always going to be, if I am selling it at X, somebody is going to be selling it at 1/3 the X. there's always going to be a solution at 1/3 x, which is what the threat is whenever I'm going and doing a bid. Every time I ask my question is that who is going to be the alternate bidder and what is going to be his bid? And I'm sure any commercial guy is going to be doing this particular question asking. And that's, I think, is going to be the decision making in the next 1.5 years to 2 years, thanks to the kind of success of this effort of all the members out here, is going to be visible. And we are going to learn.
So I think this is exactly what I'm a bit worried about. I think we've done a great job over the last years of getting this policy through, saying that FSM needs to be recognized, right? That has now been recognized. But now when you get to the government tendering bit, which is the implementation side, that's where we run the risk of getting technologies or getting partners who don't do a good job. And see, the guy who's sitting there on the table who's getting this project done, the collector level, the guy, the DM guy, whoever he is, he's finally going to just say whether it worked or it didn't work, right? And from that perspective, there's going to be a policy decision which would come about saying FSM works or does not work. And this is where we need to be extremely careful that implementation happens well. Because if it does not happen well, we have a huge problem.
One other place where we see an opportunity is in international standards that can basically help define what high quality looks like. So for instance, the ISO standards body last year or a year and a half ago basically implemented a standard for the operations of fecal sludge treatment plants. And from everything we can see, it looks like an excellent international standard that any country could put into place in order to make sure that as they grow their fecal sludge treatment plants, that they're operated well at a degree of kind of certifiable quality. We've encouraged a number of our partners, and in fact, folks from 33 different countries have been involved in a standards discussion around what would be a non-sewered reinvented toilet that was self-sufficient, required no connection to water or sewer, and has high criteria for the effluent, so that looks at pathogens, so setting that the bar of no cell-transmitted helminth eggs, for example, but also sets the bar on safety, on smell, and gaseous effluent, and that is kind of in late draft form, and so we think that it's incredibly exciting because if there's an international standard that defines what excellent quality looks like from a safety and effluent perspective, then governments can figure out how to take that into account, where it's appropriate to take that into account in their own procurement. And similarly, we've encouraged kind of the engagement of an ISO standard for what we would call an omniprocessor. So again, looking at effluent qualities to try to differentiate what good could look like in the products that these gentlemen will be bringing to market versus something that frankly purports to be doing a decent job of treatment, but really would not satisfy any kind of objective certification.
I think this is a great opportunity here in India because if the massively the interest coming from state like the 70, 80 number, 50 number, so it's quite big and encouraging. So my suggestion to team here, especially Alliance or all partners, that we can't expect like how government will change their monitoring system, all those things. It takes time. And we have already been seeing that in our, you might have also remembered our small-scale sanitation system study that has clearly indicated that liquid waste treatment is not a problem in India. We have an excellent treatment system, we have excellent service provider, but still things are not moving on the ground. And we always can blame that government is not doing this and that, but this is not a way to go. Maybe I think the best way would be, at least if we can set up mechanism in this partners group to establish a strong monitoring cell in the partner, because you have a laboratory, you have a facility, you have expertise. So if we can do that, and now if somebody is going to provide treatment plant in 20 or 32 cities, then there should be a mechanism how you really monitor somebody. And how not monitoring means not really, beating him, somebody guy not going. It's like how you support him. If there is some support needed, like he may also need support, so how can we help him in success? How can we help him in success? And for this, we all should work together. And then at the same time, let's establish very nice monitoring system, and we can prove that, look, the pathogen coming from the treatment, sludge treatment by the tide had zero pathogen or no, not any like the Hellman's egg, nothing. Same thing to with the Anchor, how we can prove that it's really producing electricity and water. That need to be really monitored, and the monitoring system need to be established here. CSC is great on that because they have already proved on the air quality things that what yesterday Sunita Narayan has clearly mentioned. So we can establish that, and that this group should really bridge between the city authority, government, and the civil society, and then come with a regular result from those products. Once we do that, because we all are working still 4 or 5 years very easily. So if we can prove that in 4 to 5 years of time to establish the monitoring system and prove that system is working well, I think it will automatically go. Then city will not say, now we are not going to do that, because their liability. If they don't do that, the things will not go well, but they will not do that because systems are going perfectly well. So that mechanism, how we create that monitoring unit by this group might be the best way, instead of saying government is not really complying this and that.
Thank you, Roshan. So given that the 10 minutes left, say
I
something
just
quickly.
want to build on what Roshan mentioned. So what he mentioned is something which I think is very critical from government's point of view. And this is, one such initiative is already, we've discussed, and the government liked the idea of having CSC incubate one of the public-private partnership labs coming up in the state. So that the capabilities are replicated at a state level while the scale-up will happen. That I think is very critical, and we could have a hub-and-spoke model working on this sort of basis across at least the focus states that we're working in, which makes it extremely important that measurement happens the way we want, and it's also localized in the government bodies.
Sure. So we have 10 minutes left. So what we'll do now is we'll try and do 3 rounds of 3 questions each. My request would be to keep the question very sharp, so avoid commentary and ask sharp questions of the audience. Do raise your hand and introduce yourself before you begin. So we'll do 3 rounds if time permits, otherwise 2 rounds of 3 questions each. There are mics in the room, I believe. So let's just have the first 3 hands up, and then the mic can go to them. So there's a hand there. Anyone else? There's a hand right up in the front. And there's a hand there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, this is Sarit. My question is to Brian. Brian, you mentioned a very right point about manufactured solution, especially to handle the problem around quality of construction, and I believe it also addresses the availability of construction contractors, those kind of issues, construction time. But as we scale up, 4,000 is what we're looking at. We obviously will be scaling up in much of the smaller towns as well, which are typically away from the markets. And I wonder if a manufactured solution or a prefabricated solution which comes and assembled at the site, how much would it address the problem of lack of availability of spares, people to do the operation and maintenance of those technologies? So how do we balance this problem?
Sure. So prefab, the balance between O&M and customization. The question here, please.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Andrea from IMNI. 3 panelists raised some questions about the importance of wastewater containment. We have information from eThekwini, South Africa. They emptied their septic tanks or latrines a couple of years ago. They emptied 100,000 septic tanks. Out of these 100,000 septic tanks, about 30% couldn't be reached by the vacuum truck because septic tanks were underground, covered by houses in the backyard. Another 40% could not be pumped because the sludge inside, the water content was so low due to leakage, it had to be emptied manually. how are you going to avoid the same situation in India?
Sure.
Thank you.
Extraction of waste from septic tanks. Professor Chari, you had a question.
So my question is not on the reinventing toilet per se, but on the treatment side. So I would not speak on that front. So while we were looking at providing transaction advisory for AP and particularly Telangana, we had the opportunity of interacting with more than 15 CEOs of the fairly large wastewater treatment companies. So we had one-on-one conversations, gave them the scale of the opportunity as well as gave them the characteristics of the waste, whatever with data. So I agree that none of them are aware of this huge market, but their process engineers use the data in a week's time came up with solutions. In fact, you'd be shocked to know that they said, this is like nothing. We handle very, very complex waste in industries. We handle leachate, which is, we talk about COD ranging from 1 lakh. So I think, are we exaggerating the whole piece of technology? There is a easy opportunity to scale. I'm not talking about, again, I will not dare get into the reinventing toilet because that's a fabulous disruptive way of looking at it. On the treatment side, I think we need to open up the market. We need to allow big players. We can't be the gatekeepers for this technology space, and we should open up and you will see fabulous opportunities. Just last week, just to give you, and I want reaction. When we shared the internal benchmark numbers, so the issue was the vendor was thinking, is it for MLD or KLD? So when I said it's for KLD, so wow, he said, this is a gold mine, I will get into this. So that's a way the market is responding, the CEOs are responding. So my request to or response from the panel is, can we create a vibrant private sector to achieve scale, and what are our efforts?
Sure, those are all great questions. So whoever wants to address, and in whichever order you feel right.
I'll let these gentlemen respond to that. But the one thing I want to come back to is I've never seen a wastewater treatment plant that was OPEX positive. And so it's not only a question of the CapEx, it's a question of what does it take to keep these things operating. And the thing that I find the most attractive about some of the OP solutions is the idea that once it's in place, it actually pays for itself and more. I don't know how many wastewater treatment plants I've seen, and many of you have also gone to fantastic technologies, but 2 out of 4 of the aeration ponds aren't working. Why is that? Because they can't afford the electricity, or there's a part broken and there's no access to the people that know how to fix it. So I think there are a lot of other challenges when you have a system that is a net OPEX sink. Very briefly to the first question, which was directly to me, there is a challenge of reaching out to the most rural of populations. What we hope for is that this is a world where you actually have toilets that become like the next white good, like a refrigerator or a television, well, a refrigerator or an air conditioner, and that you can leverage local talent for distribution, for repairs. That obviously will take quite some time to develop, but and that's why we think focusing on urban areas where that kind of access is not an immediate challenge is probably what most of the commercial partners are going to do. But then if the products evolve and become very robust, like your average refrigerator, they should be able to kind of leverage all the same kinds of distribution patterns that those mature industries leverage. And then I think the last one was about the challenges of reaching all of the tanks. The third work stream or investment portfolio that we had, other than the Reinvented toilet and the Omni processor, was what we call the Omni ingester. And it was recognizing that there are many pits that cannot be emptied by vacuum trucks, either because they're too far from the road and the pump can't go the distance, or the pits are too dry. Not typically an issue here in India, but certainly in many places in Africa. And so we actually have made many investments in different pumping technologies that would pump drier pits and that would do that would pull out all the solid garbage, because garbage in the pits is a huge problem as well. Now, the dream was to have a truck that could separate the liquids and the solids, treat all the liquids on site at very low energy costs, leave that behind, and take the solids onto the Omni processor, or the FSTP. And we've found it very challenging to do that kind of liquid-solid separation on the back of a truck at very low energy use. But we're excited at some of the work that Washai is doing, and we have one other partner that's also doing some very interesting work. This has actually been the hardest of all the challenges, the technology challenges we faced. This has been the one that has seemed to be the hardest, but we remain hopeful that maybe there are also new approaches there that will be helpful.
I will answer to Professor Chari. I think if there are 200 requirements in the next 1 year, I don't think between Ankur and myself and the technology from the Gates Foundation, we are ready to supply that number. So that's out. So that's going to be a lot of others in place. So I think that's a given. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. And there are going to be people from outside coming in. That's the reality. And if there are good technologies coming in, and if we are not able to compete with those technologies, there's something wrong with us. I think that's the rule of the market. And I think that's something which we all appreciate.
The limited point is that, like Brian was defining, if you don't have standards which define what should be the output be in something like an FSTP, that's where you run into problems where you will get substandard equipment, right? So that standard.
We should not take that call at all, because I would presume Professor Chari has talked to the best of the brains in the industry. So I think he would
Fair point.
the best of the technology.
Sure.
Do we have?
I'm sorry. Sure.
Absolutely.
Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions, or are we at the end of our time? Okay, so we'll have to sort of end this because we're out of time. But I just want to thank all the panelists for a very fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for bringing your perspectives. Thank you for the questions. I don't want to summarize this because very, very rich discussion. Just the one sentence summary would be very exciting times. Lots of the technologies are where they expect it to be, given the maturity of the industry. Pull needs to be created through standards, through, let's say, a more mature understanding of the choices that procurement actually should be organized around, and the future is very bright. Okay, thank you.